Okay, I'm already here for part 2 of our long coat pattern drafting for a 6-year-old child, and I welcome you to this second edition. Here we will be developing a shawl collar as well as trimming of this pattern. In case you haven't watched the way we drafted these bodies, here is the video. Also, I've put its link in the description box down below. It would be better you watch part 1, then you come back and watch this part 2. Okay, let us get started. I get the back pattern. I first mark 0.5 inches seam allowance. Then I measure from this center back all the way to seam allowance point. Here I have 2.4 inches. Now, at this point along this lapel break line, I measure upwards, copped back neck measurements 2.4 inches. Then at this 2.4 inch point, I draw a perpendicular line like this. Still at this point along this line, I mark 1 inch collar stand. Also, I come to this neckline point, I mark inwards 0.25 inches. I connect this point to this point in this way. I blend this point back to the neckline. Still from lapel break line at this line, I mark 1.5 inches collar width. Then I connect this collar with this point back to the lapel like this to create a shawl collar. Here I mark 1 inch for seam allowance, and this will be the joining point of the shawl center back. We are done with the collar drafting of this pattern. Next is to trim out this coat pattern like this. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, kind and humble request to you, please. Top Stitch Tailoring Studio needs financial support, as you can see in this image. Here is TOPTS official ground to be with a postal address, Bale, Uganda. For contributions, please, I welcome it. Together we can develop this workshop and make this world a better place to live when we create employment for others. Thank you, please. Let us continue. I'm done with the trimming, and here are our 3 panels. Next is to trace out facing for this front panel. I lay and pin my front pattern like this. I go ahead and trace out this front panel. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are done with the tracing of the front panel facing. Next is to draft the sleeve for this pattern, and it will be a 2-piece sleeve. I get my new pattern paper, then I draw 1 vertical guideline and this 1 horizontal line at the top of my pattern paper, which will be the starting point for most of my calculated sleeve measurements as well as sleeve head. After, I continue determining other horizontal working lines that are needed for this sleeve project. From starting point A or sleeve head, I measure downwards. Sleeve length for this child is 15.5 inches. I add 0.5 inch length is giving me 16 inches. I square across a straight line. Next is to determine the sleeve bicep line. From this starting point, I measure downwards chest 22 inches divided by 6, giving me 3.6 inches. Still, from this starting point, I measure downwards chest 22 inches divided by 16, giving me 1.3 inches. But I just customize this to 1.25 inches for cup height. From this bicep height line, I measure upwards chest 22 inches divided by 24, giving me 0.9 inches for across height. After, I square across a straight line. I measure this distance from bicep line to sleeve hemline. I divide it by 2 to get the midpoint. Then from this midpoint, I mark upwards 1.5 inches for the position of the elbow line. I square across a straight line. Now, I go ahead and insert calculated sleeve measurement to these horizontal lines accordingly. I come to this bicep height line. I measure inwards chest 22 inches divided by 4, giving me 5.5 inches. Next, I mark the sleeve cup opening. I come to the hemline. I mark inwards chest 22 inches divided by 6, giving me 3.6 inches. Then, I connect this bicep point to this cuff point like this. Next is to shape the sleeve at the elbow line. At this elbow line point, I mark inwards 0.5 inches for elbow shaping. I draw the shaped line like this. Next is to mark out the big sleeve. At this point, I mark outwards 0.5 inches, elbow line 0.5 inches, hemline 0.5 inches. I connect these points together in this way to create a big sleeve seam line. I measure this distance from bicep to this 5.5 inch point. I divide by 2 to get the midpoint. So here is the midpoint. I square up a straight grain line. At the sleeve head, I create slant lines like this. I come to this slant line. I measure this distance. I divide by 2 to get my midpoint. So at this midpoint, I mark upwards 0.5 inches. Also at this point, I mark diagonally 0.5 inches. Then using my free hand, I connect these points together to create a big sleeve cap head. Ladies and gentlemen, we are almost getting done. Next is to mark out the small sleeve. Here I mark inwards 0.5 inches. Elbow line I mark 0.5 inches. Hemline I mark 0.5 inches. I connect these points together in this way to create small sleeve back seam line. From this 5.5 inch point, I mark inwards 0.5 inches, elbow line 0.5 inches, hemline 0.5 inches. Still, I connect these points together in this way to create small sleeve front seam line. Here I mark inwards 0.5 inches. The grain line I mark downwards 0.25 inches. Here I mark 0.25 inches. Then, using my free hand, I connect these points together to create a small or underarm curve line. Ladies and gentlemen, remember to add seam allowance of your choice to this small sleeve. Next is to work on the cuff opening. At this point, I mark upwards 0.5 inches for cup shaping. Also on this side, I mark downwards 0.5 inches. Then I connect these points together to create new cuff opening hemline. Also, I mark downwards 1.5 inch sleeve hem allowance. Still, I square across a hem allowance line. Here I mark sleeve vent opening 3.5 inches by 2 inches. Next is to trim off the excess from the sleeve pattern. Here is our sleeve. I go ahead and trace out the small sleeve like this. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our coat drafting class. If you have learned something new in this tutorial, please let me know by leaving your comment in the comment section down below. I would wish to read those comments and give you back the replies. Watch out for part 3 when we are cutting these patterns on fabric and preparing them for sewing. For now, allow me to say bye-bye. See you in the fabric cutting video. Shalom. God bless you all. I sign out.